reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "A rich man had a steward who was reported to him for squandering his property. He summoned him and said, 'What is this I hear about you? Prepare a full account of your stewardship, because you can no longer be my steward.' The steward said to himself, 'What shall I do now that my master is taking the position of steward away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do, so that when I am removed from the stewardship, they may welcome me into their homes.' He called in his master's debtors one by one. To the first he said, 'How much do you owe my master?' He replied, 100 measures of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Here is your promissory note. Sit down and quickly write one for 50. Then to another the steward said, 'And you, how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 cores of wheat.' The steward said to him, 'Here is your promissory note. Write one for 80. And the master commended that dishonest steward for acting prudently. For the children of this world are more prudent in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. I tell you, make friends for yourselves with dishonest wealth, so that when it fails, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. The person who is trustworthy in very small matters is also trustworthy in great ones. And the person who is dishonest in very small matters is also dishonest in great ones. If therefore you are not trustworthy with dishonest wealth, who will trust you with true wealth? If you are not trustworthy with what belongs to another, who will give you what is yours? No servant can serve two masters. He will either hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon. The Gospel of the Lord.
Well, when the owner heard about this devious employee, he gave him at least credit for being enterprising. Why? And here's the moral of the story. Because the worldly people take more initiative than the otherworldly, that is, the heavenly-minded people, when it comes to dealing with their own kind. Clearly, Jesus is not commending the man for being devious or disloyal or dishonest. Rather, the key word here is for being enterprising about looking after his welfare. Jesus' point is, if the worldly people who are not directed by higher principles or morals or values are looking after their temporal welfare, why should not we spiritual people who operate out of a higher principle and motivation be enterprising about our spiritual welfare? And in so using this example of a bad steward, Jesus says, should not we be good stewards? At least this is the implication. Should not we be good stewards of our talent and time and treasure, in order that we could secure an eternal reward in heaven?
Hi, my name is Father Mike Schmitz, and this is Ascension Presents. So I know that a lot of people struggle with procrastination. And when I say procrastination, you probably know what I know, is that procrastination does not mean I'm doing nothing. Procrastination doesn't mean I'm doing nothing. Procrastination means I'm doing everything except for the one thing I'm supposed to be doing, doesn't it? Right? That's it. If that's you, then you are struggling with something that's bigger than simple procrastination. You're struggling with something that virtually every Christian has struggled with. all the way back to the time of Jesus and from then on. In the early church, so actually maybe 300 years after Christ, in the early church, you had some people, when Christianity became like the religion of the Roman Empire, you had some people who were called to enter into the wilderness, literally, who would go into the desert and live in a little hut. They were hermits, and they just devoted their lives to penance. They devoted their lives to prayer. And those desert fathers and mothers, they call them desert fathers and mothers, they were the place, they discovered what they originally termed like the 7 deadly sins, right? So you have gluttony, and you have lust, and you have anger, and you have greed, all these kinds of things, like the 7 deadly sins. The desert fathers and mothers would say that, in the course of your Christian life, in the course of being out there in the desert, virtually, everyone's going to experience some of the deadly sins, but there was one of the deadly sins, one of those things that comes against every person, that came against every one of them. And that was what they called acedia. A-C-E-D-I-A, acedia. And later on, St. Thomas Aquinas called it sloth or sloth. They called it the noonday devil. Why would they call it the noonday devil? Imagine living in a hut in the desert. So you get up in the morning and you do your morning routine at the cool of the morning. It's nice out, but all of a sudden at 10 o'clock or so, the sun's right above. And from roughly 10 o'clock until 2 o'clock, it seems like the sun's not moving. The cool of the morning is past. And the night's not here yet where you get to have your meal and you get to kind of relax. It's just stay in your hut and pray. And it seems like nothing's changing and nothing's happening. This is essentially if you really want to get down to it, this is a microcosm of a midlife crisis. Think about if you're in your midlife, what happens? The eagerness, the excitement, all the anticipation, the hope, the promise of youth is gone. And yet the rest and the fruits and like that ability to kind of enter into a certain kind of like stage in your life is not yet here. But I'm right in the middle of this, and I just want a different life than the life I have right now. This is the deadly sin so many people come against in their midlife. It's the noonday devil, acedia. Now, when St. Thomas Aquinas started calling it sloth, what happened was people would say, oh, sloth is kind of a slowness to respond to the things of God, right? So I'm called to pray, and I don't really want to do it. Or I'm called to enter into God's joy of just following after him, and I kind of don't want to do it. And so we saw it as like laziness. But acedia is different. It's more precise. It's not laziness. A person could be a workaholic and still have sloth, still have acedia. Because why? Because go back to the beginning of this video. Procrastination comes from not from doing nothing. It comes from I want to do everything except for the one thing I'm supposed to be doing. That's what the desert fathers and mothers called acedia. I'm supposed to be sitting here in the hut, but I have all these thoughts. Like, maybe I should go back into the city and serve the poor. But I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be here, but maybe I should go and gather firewood. I'm supposed to be here, but maybe I should go and do something else. And the temptation is, I want to do anything but the one thing I'm supposed to be doing. Is that you right now? Because a lot of times in the Christian life, that's how we find ourselves. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm praying all these prayers. I'm doing all this activity. The question we have to ask is, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? Because I could stop or pause and just pump the brakes for a second and say, am I doing all this stuff, all this extra activity in lieu of or in place of the one thing I should be doing? At some point in our lives, every one of us gets to a season where we want to bolt, where we want to take off. We just want to run. That's called acedia. But the desert fathers and mothers said in that moment, the remedy for acedia is God's love. That might seem simplistic, but it's not. The remedy for acedia is the incarnation. The remedy for acedia is looking at Jesus Christ, who in his every step of his life is saying yes to his Father, yes to this moment, yes to dinner with his friends, yes to dinner with sinners, yes to traveling from this place to that place, yes to this trial, yes to the Father's will, even though he prayed that the cup would pass by him. Yes, to his crucifixion and death. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. The answer to acedia is looking at Jesus and saying, okay, what held him to the cross, we know this, what held him to the cross was not the nails. What held him to the cross was his love. What is holding your life in place? What's helping you stay in your hut when you want to be doing anything except for the one thing you're supposed to be doing? It's not the nails, it's not bondage, it's love. the answer to acedia is, how can I love well in this moment, in this place, as Christ loved? Fight against the demon of acedia. Fight against that temptation to run off and abandon the people that you love the most and you're called to love the most. Fight that temptation to run off and do anything but the one thing you're supposed to be doing. And do it with love. Fight with love. From all of us here at Ascension Presents, my name is Father Mike. God bless.
Father John Muir here. Thanks for joining me right here on Catholic Breakfast. Today I want to talk about Michael Jordan and living in the present moment. So like a lot of you guys have been watching this great 10-part documentary series on Michael Jordan and the 1998 Chicago Bulls called The Last Dance on ESPN. There is a really cool spiritual point I wanted to share with you that I think is really worth kind of meditating on. It really can help us in our daily lives. Now, why watch a sports figure or a sports documentary? Well, here's why, because it's a meditation on virtue in a lot of ways. Here's a great line from St. Paul to Timothy. It's 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8. Paul is speaking to Timothy. For while physical training is of limited value, devotion is valuable in every respect, since it holds a promise of life, both for the present and for the future. Paul here is in this Greco-Roman world where athletics was a big deal. And Paul isn't saying that we should just get rid of sports because we've got these spiritual things, right? The mystery of Jesus and the church and etc. No. Doing and meditating on athletics can be of value. There's a lot to learn there, and it can help us understand not just the physical, but the spiritual life. As I'm watching Michael Jordan and this great documentary on him called The Last Dance, I think, like a lot of people, I'm asking the question, how do you get so good at something? I mean, that's the question, right? What made Michael Jordan to be Michael Jordan? And that's just an endlessly fascinating question. And here's one slice of that pie in terms of how I think the documentary answers it. Michael's ability to stay and respond in the present moment. Now, there's nothing new about that. I think sports psychologists and sports people have been playing with that idea all the time, right? Being in the zone. What does it mean to be totally in the present moment, able to respond to the demands here and now? There was one point in this series, I think it's episode 9 or 10 of The Last Dance, where Michael is talking about that. And someone was asking him about being afraid to take, a big shot or the last shot in a game. And he says, why would I worry about missing a shot that I haven't taken yet? And I thought, that's the power to stay in the present moment. Where can an athlete get jammed up in terms of getting pulled out of the present moment? Well, always two directions. One is to the past and one is to the future. The past can be with respect to good or bad things. And this is true for us in our own life, too. I feel regret over something that was bad in the past, which now makes me fearful about trying again in the future, taking a shot. Or with respect to good things in the past. There's one point in the documentary when Jordan kind of lambastes players who are riding high on their past championships and they're not responding with virtue and discipline now in the present moment at the beginning of a new season. If you want a meditation on this in Catholic life, in terms of our Catholic tradition, look no further than Brother Lawrence. He was a 17th century Carmelite brother who wrote a very cool little book called The Practice of the Presence of God. The basic idea is God is present in the present moment. Not so much in the past for us, definitely not in the future, because the future is the least real thing we've got. But the present moment is what he called a kind of sacrament, a mystery of God unveiling and revealing his presence here and now. To live that takes a certain trust, right? Trust in God's presence in the future, that we can't worry about the future. Trust in his mercy in the past for my failures, and letting go of good things in the past so that I can be free right now. I noticed in the documentary, Michael Jordan had this kind of childlike quality. Before and after games, he's just kind of acting like a kid. He's listening to music on the bus. He had this calm sense about him, this ability to respond to the present moment. Why? I don't know. Did it have something to do with his parents, his upbringing, maybe, his coaches? Sure. A kind of natural gifts from God, maybe it's even sort of some grace from God to stay right there in the present moment. I think maybe all that's true, but it's also just the mystery of his life. It inspires me, and I think it can inspire us to ask God for the grace to live that virtue in our lives, whatever we're called to do. We can call on the Holy Spirit to help us do that. Holy Spirit, help me to stay right in the present moment. Are you obsessed with the past? Entrust it to God's mercy. Are you worried about the future? Entrust it to God's providence, so that we can have that childlike spirit and energy to be in the present moment, to respond to the demands of the present moment. Then we're a little bit like Michael Jordan. Thanks for watching.